We have our, cover northern Mississippi.
All right, we will get back into our work meeting. Just for the sake of the wonderful individual here who has been sitting through all of our actions tonight, I'm going to ask that we get a quick motion to move item 3.9 to the next item on the agenda so that we can get that taken care of and let that resident go home.
So moved.
All in favor?
Second. Aye.
Aye, great. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start with item 3.9. Direction regarding requests to issue encroachment permits or to vacate city interests and easements. Nathan.
So, the city there's two separate issues here, and probably covered by two policies, but they are related. One is when a resident either desires to or has knowingly or unknowingly moved onto an occupied property owned by the city, whether that be a right of way or green space. And in that instance, there are two pieces. One, how do we enforce and go after and say you need to move your things, or do we create a process where we can issue a revocable permit?
Let's just make him watch our discussion from what, a month ago?
Probably.
I think I went on for like an hour on it.
So in other, you give a revocable, that allows it to be recorded. Now, generally you have a reason to do that. You might get a benefit from it. Somebody puts in a retaining wall that is partially into a right of way. But it provides, it gives the retaining wall so you're not dealing with soils coming down into the right of way. There are other things. Or you may have a piece of right of way that is not developed and you don't have the intent to develop it anytime soon, but somebody's using it maybe to park cars. There may be the ability to say, okay, if you improve it, we'll allow you to do that, but we can remove that right
At any time.
Then it gets recorded, people know it's not really theirs, it's revocable. So that's one process. The individual visiting with us tonight, thank you for sitting through the entire long meeting, is really, it's a process of when the city has a right. In this instance, we have trails that residents have asked, they don't see anybody using those trails, they would like to remove those trails. The city doesn't have a process really to deal with that. To formalize that, bring that to council. In other instances, other places I've been, you would have a process where maybe they have to go get signatures from all the abutting property owners who would be impacted by that closure. Maybe there's a public notice process so that others who might use the trail or right of way have the opportunity to weigh in before council considers that. Many of these you can't just get rid of a part, because then you have a trail that goes
To nothing.
and then continues after. So it's a difficult piece. Policy would just give staff some direction on how you want us to process those requests. Status quo is we say council hasn't typically done those, they can come and ask you in public comment. But that's where we're at. We're also dealing with some code enforcement on those encroachments. Right now, our intent is to tell them they have to move their stuff. But it would be, I think, stronger for staff if we had a policy that says, yes, that is our policy. Cause otherwise, you'll get calls, they'll be coming to you, looking for you to, hey, this is happening, we want you to fix it. So we're looking for really some guidance. Mr. Alton?
Yes, sir.
His issue is there's a trail that borders his property. It was recorded as part of the it's a little unique in the fact that it was recorded as an easement across their private property as opposed to dedicated as a public trail or right of way. Again, I think this was, this was a long.
It's recorded by plat in like 2005.
Yeah, so we're talking 16 years ago, somebody at that time that thought that was a good idea. Normally we would say make that,
Dedication, yeah.
dedicate that, not just stick an easement across a bunch of back of properties. So we're looking for some guidance. What is council, how do you want us to proceed? I can be happy to bring you a policy I think has worked in other places for you to consider.
Open to your suggestions from experience. What I've said on the first count over and over is move it. Because what we end up with and what we currently continue to deal with is kind of a common construction practice of oh, it's only 10 feet, go ahead, yeah, we'll just build a pool there and the city will make it. Like, it's a taking, right? And it's become kind of a construction practice. And if we can either let them continue to do it and never do anything about it, or we can say no, enforce it. Say, nope, the contractor knew what the rules were, he knew he could go and take it up with him, rip it out.
Now, if you'd only said that succinctly, last meeting.
Well, we went around. It wasn't just me.
So,
On the second count, like if it's a something like that, that's somewhat of an anomaly that people aren't using, and I mean, that's different to me, right? That like they haven't done it on purpose, it's on their property and nobody uses it, so why is it still there?
Well, and that, so, in regards to the first, yes, absolutely, enforce it, get the policy under, I'm entirely supportive. In regards to the other issue, I think the issue is not the specific request by that resident, I think the issue is more, what is our policy, are we going to allow them to make that request?
Right.
And, are we gonna, consider? In all honesty, as a rule, not in regards to a specific request, as a rule, I don't see us making any sense for us as a rule to give up right of way, for whatever reason it is. Now, might there be a situation where it might be extremely unique? Maybe, but as far as making it a policy to allow requests to vacate right of ways or that concerns me because would never be my real true intent. And so I'd have a hard time putting that into policy to allow that to happen when that's not what I would intend to allow anyways. Does that make sense?
and that's good, you would hate to make them go through and get a bunch of,
Exactly.
do a petition, get a bunch of
Pay
signatures and then.
for some-
We're gonna say no
Well, we're gonna say no
And I agree
anyways.
with the right of way, the specific issue of an easement on someone's property for an easement for specifically for a trail.
It's for a horse trail as it was designed, and so I don't believe the properties that the trail crosses are horse properties per se, but maybe the properties that abut it are. And I'm gonna look at you because you live there, but I think that, looking at the maps and driving out your neighborhood, that's what it looks like.
Do you want my input?
Normally, we just keep it on the council staff. I am gonna ask a question though. What I would like to see is I would like to see us split these two issues out. I am happy, since we basically already have a request for this, to, because it was before our request, or before we started looking at policy, to consider a specific issue. But in regards to a general policy, so I'd ask that would come back as a separate item for us to look at with maps and discuss and to have that. In regards to a policy, I would like to make the policy that we don't, that the policy is that we don't look at removing right of way that, or easements or whatever access, that's an asset to the city that why would we give up unless there is a specific reason for the council to do it?
Well, I'm devil's advocate on that one, cause we had one several months ago that Wendy brought to us, there's a trail, an active trail that goes behind these houses.
It was up by, just south of Butterfield up there, where Solemn Way area.
It's up there
is,
somewhere.
a little piece of a trail.
But there's it's an active trail behind the homes going up to the mountain, right? But the issue was that it was platted or whatever it was recorded that there was supposed to be an access between these two properties.
I remember.
There's no fence or wall or anything, it's just grass between the two, right? And the issue was, well, nobody knows that this is supposed to be an entrance, the city hasn't marked it as an entrance. Like, why are we keeping that, easement or right of way, whatever it is, however it was done?
And there were like
In
three
that-
other accesses already
Yeah.
being used, right?
And there were other accesses, so closing that, I mean, we don't really have any intention of making that an access, so why wouldn't we? So
Well,
there's some, at least in my limited 5 years, that's the only other instance that's come up like that.
So I would just say too that I have no interest in having the city own property, own strips and chunks of things we don't use, we're never gonna use. It opens us up for liability and everything else, maintenance and everything else on these little things. A few months ago, we talked about at the end of 7300, the side of the mountain up there. It's nothing, the topo on it is terrible.
Oh, at the end of that
Yeah, and
cul-de-sac up
I'm
there.
And it was similar to this, right? It was
Yeah,
like
we
right
got
at the
it-
end of it or
we
something
got it
and
for-
it's all slope, we're never
We
gonna
got
use it
for
for
open space, we're never gonna use it, and so when I was saying that in the past, the reason I wanted to know what land we own, those are the things I wanna know, what land we own. Do we own little strip right here and there? Those things, in my opinion, should be taken care of through this policy, be done with those kind of things, cause I believe they open us up for liability. Somebody got hurt on that little strip, it's our property.
Oh, and it's not any more liability than if they got hurt here at City Hall. I have a hard
True,
time
but-
with that.
True, but
particular
it's our property that we don't need to have
Traffic
liability
nuisance.
on, period. What are we using it for?
That's a
If we
steep
have
hill,
property, we
it's
should
not
have a
maintained.
purpose for it and utilize it to its purpose. Or we need to have some sort of policy that allows us to vacate and move on.
Where I agree with David is if it's an intended right of way, if that's supposed to be an entrance, we have plans to make that an entrance, et cetera, yeah, why would we give anything like that up? But
Agreed.
if it's something that we got as part of a requirement that they had to donate this 40% slope that nobody can do anything on, we can't even plant grass there or whatever, why are we keeping it for all those reasons?
So I might request on that, instead of, if we are gonna go that way with a policy, I would not want that to be, I would want that to be staff led. I'd want the city to be making those proposals to the council and not necessarily something that we just open up to the public to say, oh, you want this piece of land, come right
Oh,
in.
Yeah, for
recommend.
sure.
I would rather be the policy that from time to time, staff will make your recommendations to the city council of changes that might be recommended in the benefit of the city. But I would not want to necessarily go out and encourage residents to go in and say, oh, well, I want this piece of land, so I'm gonna go through this process. Does
I
that,
think
that,
was the
yeah.
stated fear of having a policy would
Yeah.
invite those apprehensions.
and that's, so that's what Chase is for, right? That's what you're for, is to figure out how to make that work where we're not inviting opportunities for somebody to think that they're gonna get something when we have no intention to do it.
I think there's lots of those requests already without.
Without a policy. I very much, like, look, if there's a situation where it makes absolutely no sense for us to have something, fine, like, we should consider it, but I would look to staff to make those recommendations and not to the residents to make those recommendations. So any policy that I would be supportive of would really need to be staff oriented and come from staff and not like, sure, if a resident wants to go to staff and try to convince them to make that recommendation, great. But if it's not a recommendation from staff, I'm probably not gonna be willing to consider it. Does that make sense?
Okay, so
Well, that's-
if I could restate real quick, just so I'm clear, I think what you're saying is you want us to come with, or you would be supportive of a policy that gives staff tools on how to deal with it, but not necessarily an application process. for the
Yes, yes.
Well, to me, there's a big difference between this kind of being, this easement being on somebody's property that they have to deal with, right? Versus this extra piece of land that we own that we're not doing anything with. I mean, those are two totally different
Yeah.
things. So if a resident says, look, you have this easement on my property that you're not using, you're not maintaining, so- well, I think that's maybe deserves a policy in and of itself.
Yeah.
But that to me, that's totally different than there being a used access and right of way and them saying, hey, nobody really uses that, we wanna buy it from the city. No.
These are almost like three different issues, right? One is easements.
Right, which is different, cause it's
Right.
on their property.
That's on their
A,
property, that's fair.
a second issue is surplus property that has no purpose or
Real
use,
value.
right?
We got it as part of open
Right,
space
and then
for
there
some
is,
crappy
then there's
requirement.
encroachments, which is a totally different issue, right? So, sorry to complicate it more,
No,
but it
it's-
seems like there's three different
Yeah.
topics.
That's what these guys are for.
That's an important point because the disposal procedures for rights of way are a lot different than they are for an easement. for instance.
Yeah, and the encroachment issue, a lot of it is going to depend on, you know, even if somebody said, yeah, let's give them that, we may not be able to, depending on how we acquired the
Right.
rights to the property.
Part of the development agreement, that has to be common space, et cetera.
Okay, I think I have some, Chase and I are meeting Friday to talk about a bunch of stuff, so we'll start.
But
If you're comfortable with drafting the policy staff led, that's what we can do. and bring it
yes,
back.
please, I would recommend that staff provide us some insight and their recommendations on how to do that within maybe the framework of what we've talked about here.
Everybody's okay with that concept?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
We'll come up with something.
You
we'd
wanna
like
do
that
more
to
work,
be
you guys do more.
administrative process, not a.
But yes,
legislative
ultimately,
process.
most of this,
But I think you can have policies that's gotta be specific to those different types. But I try to generalize the
There's a couple of policies.
Pandora's box.
The idea is to do more work now to prevent a lot
A
more work
lot
in
of
the
work
future.
later.
Yeah.
Or lawsuits. So, any other further discussion or direction that staff needs on this? Anything?
So I understand, I should bring back, so just make sure, bring back the specific issue that was presented.
Yes.
It's an easement, it's kind of,
We should look
I
at that
don't know
one
how
as
many
a-
of those we have, specifically, Chase, but again, this was recorded 2005 as an easement
I looked,
across
yeah.
several parcels as opposed to a true right of
I
way.
looked at this when this issue came up a few months ago. Right, we had a resident, I don't remember if you recall, we had a resident asking us to vacate a portion of a public easement over private property. We don't have a lot. It's very minimal.
Just a few of them.
I say that one was an actual bridle path that was marked and being
This
used.
is the request at hand is the same trail.
Oh, so it's the same, so
Different
that's, so that's the thing I was
different
gonna say
property
is
owner,
if,
same trail.
is if it's part of a complete trail, right? That's totally different to me than if it's just this between those two.
So, yeah,
Right.
let's have that come back and let's have that discussion,
We'll bring you some maps, you can look at it.
so that we can really understand in relations to what we did with the previous as well. Just so that we can make sure we're being consistent. Great, with that, we will move back to, or on to, or whatever.
David?
Can I have some direction?
Actually, right now, what I would direct you to is to staff, and staff will give you some further direction, so that'll be handled through them, so, thank you.
Which staff?
If Nathan wants to step out for just a second, he's welcome to do so. We will move on to item 3.6, discussion of the draft land development code amendments in the TM technology zone, technology manufacturing zone to remove the minimum master plan area requirement. Michael.
Okay, we're just looking for
A clicker?
but while we're finding that, this is a pretty straightforward text amendment. Most of our council, were present when we annexed the area where Bullfrog Spa was built. That annexation took place at the beginning of 2019. That annexation petition started out much larger. When it all got done, we ended up with about a 30-acre piece.
Versus
The-
200.
200,
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah. The TM zone has a requirement in there that says that what guides development there is influenced by a master plan, and you're supposed to have an area of 50 acres for a master plan within the TM zone. We obviously don't have 50 acres. Our economic development department has been promoting that property, answering questions about that property, and we do have a few additional parcels around the Bullfrog Spa site that are eligible for development. And that clause, that 50-acre minimum clause, has caused some of potential development partners to be a little gun shy. And so the request came to planning department that economic development would like to see that be modified somehow. We had looked at removing or proposing to remove all of that language and just rely on the base zone. But as an option, we just said, how about we just remove the minimum area requirement? We still require future development to look at the property more holistically, because oftentimes in these larger manufacturing developments, you may have multiple buildings, you may even have multiple land use activities on the same site. So it's just kind of another layer of doing like a site plan review with some specific guidelines. That's the option that the planning commission had opted for, and forwarding to you a request for amending the TM zone. We're keeping the site plan or the master plan requirement in the TM zone, but just simply recommending that we remove the minimum area requirement. Now, another reason maybe to think about keeping those standards in the current code is if we do have an opportunity in the future for annexation and to expand that TM zone, where we now have more than 50 acres under contiguous ownership, maybe we could energize or re-employ that standard for future development
How many
potentials.
acres of the 30 did Bullfrog take again, like 18, 20, something like that?
They're on about 10 with an additional 14 to expand in the
To
future.
expand, okay, so.
Yeah.
So 25 total is them, so there's really like
There's
one
like, there's about,
5 acre spot.
yeah, about 5 acres or 2.5 each. There's two more lots to the east.
Those are the two smaller lots on the
To the east.
east side.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I mean, we created the TM zone specifically for that project at the time, 250 acres, and part of that selling point was to the taxing districts to show them that this was going to be something that was master planned and get them to sign on to getting tax incentives.
Correct.
And then Kennecott pulled the rug out from under us and said, oh, on the day of, we went from 230 to
70.
250, something like that, to the week before, well, it's gonna be less, maybe 150 or so, we show up that day. Probably 80 before the meeting, we go into the general meeting, 30. So, like, the purpose of it is somewhat defeated unless, and they own all the land surrounding it, so unless there's imminent chance of getting the rest of it, I don't know why we would keep that requirement in place, right?
I'm in agreement.
I mean, if we annex, I mean, they've got 2,000 acres out there, we can always put that sort of thing in place again,
Yeah.
right? Am I thinking about this right?
I'm in agreement with you and I'm totally fine with removing.
So that's the proposal and
I just say that the caveat would be if there's further annexation of land,
We would revisit it.
that we would bring this back for a
sure.
amendment.
Sherry, any thoughts?
No, I agree.
Clint?
Okay.
Is Clint still with us?
But we talk about so many things, it's been so many years
Yeah, I'm
now
here.
that I
John-
wanna make sure I'm
Jonathan?
thinking about the right place.
Do we still have Clint with us? Or we lost him?
was on.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, do you have any thoughts or input?
No, I agree with what's been said there. We just need to remove the requirement right now.
Okay, cool. Do you have the direction you need, Michael? Okay, we will move on then to item 3.7. Discussion of proposed zoning map amendment request from Symphony Homes for 5 acres located at 13499 South, 7300 West from A1 to A25.
Last time this would not advance, Jonathan, but I'm not sure why. It's on.
Was the USB thing still plugged in?
Bottom.
Oh,
No.
It's in the other computer.
okay. This is another project where the planning commission reviewed a preliminary subdivision plat, but that plat is contingent upon a rezone. So the plat's been tabled pending the outcome of this rezone. The rezone is what we've seen many times before, an A1 zone, being requested to go to an 8.25 for about 5 acres of property. The planning commission did make a recommendation, I believe it was 6-0, for approval. So,
The
No, I
A2
asked
divide.
about-
Hit the next screen
But
so
I
you can
thought
look
that
at the
their
map.
approval also said that they would like it to be 10 lots rather than 11.
so we're still working through the actual number of lots based on the density criteria. Engineering is still discussing that issue with the applicant. There's been issues regarding the storm drainage.
Can we, I gotta see the
Yeah,
map.
yeah, sorry.
How in the-
Let's see if we
Like,
can
how in the world does
advance.
5 acres qualify for density bonus? That's my only question, cause they changed the application to A25 to comply with the general plan, right?
Right,
Reading the report.
What's that property right
So
next
to
to
me,
it?
that's the only thing. is
A1.
why-
It's
like, why
A1.
is
What's the actual, is it just actual agriculture that's being used
No
right now?
bonuses.
it's just vacant.
That's Gina.
It's all one
Yeah.
piece too.
That's
There's
Yeah.
no benefit to the city of cramming more stuff in that, right? I mean, the purpose of the density bonuses is to encourage them to do something that benefits the city. Like, what density bonuses will apply to
What's
this?
what's the general
Very
plan?
Is it one unit
General
maybe?
plan is this residential agriculture.
Agriculture residential.
Yeah. Yeah, agricultural residential. What's kind of curious, and I don't know the history on this, but you can see in the zoning map, we have done some R110.
It was a mistake according to your predecessor.
Okay, so, yeah, underneath it should have been at some
Sorry, I
type of
was
an A
at that
zone.
meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be some type of an A zone.
I,
There's one at the end of the street also that was a mistake.
what was the recommendation of the planning commission?
Recommendation for approval, but we're still obviously working through whether or not they
Why
qualify
did
for
they-
density
But
bonuses.
maximizing the number of units.
Why are we not looking at A5 as opposed to
Limiting,
A25?
sorry, not maximizing, limiting.
The request was just simply 8.25, that's what
But
they
well,
had
the
submitted.
difficult thing is once again, we go back to our general plan, which I understand, it's general,
So,
but it's meant to show our intent. right? And our intent shows that we intend it to be that. But back to the conversation I've had before and with Michael, it's like, then if we're gonna call it agricultural, why don't we make somehow in there that some of these lots have to be agriculturally sized?
Yeah,
instead of-
that's the
instead
big
of just
question I have.
R110, because we had the same issue the other day when they wanted to develop the Mascaro and the piece right next to it off of Gina, that's just around the corner from this, and they can't get enough lots in there to make it pencil, but if we have a zone that says A25, what does that say to you if you read A25?
And I'll
What
tell
would
you,
you
Quarter acre
say?
lot.
A quarter acre lot, but it's not a quarter acre.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
have,
it's very confusing.
and I mean, I'm looking at this going, we have the same neighborhood that houses next to them have different zonings, literally next door, and they go back and forth.
Yep.
Just to the north, like to me,
And they're all the same.
and they're literally, obviously the same neighborhood, built the exact same. I have a hard time saying that I'm comfortable with changing it, cause the general plan would allow what? What would the general plan allow?
But
A general plan would allow A25?
Yes, yeah, they're not changing the general plan,
they
their
had
rezone is
originally
consistent with
applied
the
for
general
ask-
plan.
can I ask a question?
R110 and changed the application.
What-
To A25.
What is the fundamental difference between A quarter acre lots and residential quarter acre
Uh,
Cause
lots?
it's
and
not
animal-
a quarter
what-
acre
what-
lot, it's a minimum.
Animal rights and a
Animal
quarter
rights.
acre, what do you get, chickens?
Chickens, pigs,
that it? I mean-
sheep.
There's
Yeah,
there are,
chickens, goats,
sheep.
right, small, so you can have up to 2 goats or sheep or
Sheep.
whatever, right, so 4-H sort of
But
stuff,
that's
I've been
what-
through this a million
But
times.
that's what ticks everybody off is like,
Half acres,
why is their
you can have 2
property,
large
why is their
animals.
quarter acre lot different than my quarter acre lot? It's still in a neighborhood, it's still
Well, and
surrounded by
Some
houses, they're
people
all the
wanna
same.
live where you don't have to listen to the rooster,
Okay.
That's the difference, yeah, that's exactly.
that's the difference.
Well, and that's why I'm going back, if you go back to that last map, I'm looking
Oh,
at that
chicken.
last map and going, one more. And going, what the?
Right, and some of these developers want their HOA restrictions to say you can't have any of those
Well,
things.
this right here, you've said this last time, this right here is why I run for office, cause it's exactly what you're talking about, this big mess, cause I live there.
That's
It's a nice checkerboard.
Yeah,
That's ridiculous.
How does that, does that,
Or 110.
the way that's zoned, if that's correct, what's the is that compliant with the general plan? Did they,
no, but it was also before part of, cause Rose Basin wasn't technically part of the general plan for a long time, because when it annexed, we had to go through a process of adding it to the general plan, so then some of this stuff got,
Snuck in before all that happened. Yeah, Jared.
sorry.
it's just nuts because
Jonathan's like, quit
that's a
complaining,
frustration,
Jerry.
like getting involved at the resident level, right? Is you get in, you try to learn these rules and learn how it all works. And it says explicitly that you cannot rezone something to something that doesn't fit the general plan.
I've said
Not
that
a
time,
general
I've
And
said
that,
that.
we were told that a million times, and then it was, well, the general plan's general, they can zone it whatever they want, but then they just have to go back and change the general plan to make it the same as what they zoned it, like that. Is so
at least you
bad.
should do it concurrent. Personally, I think if I were to recommend an amendment to the 8.25 zone, it would be just 2 quarter acre lots. And you can call it 8.25 if we want to, but it's too confusing, the whole density bonus structure, all of that stuff.
Amen.
Yeah,
Why not
it's just,
I mean, I'm fine, like, if the general plan is what we said we want in the general plan, I'm fine with allowing A25. So from a standpoint of, is it the right
Just give the
zone?
minimum
That's-
lot.
That's the part that doesn't matter. It's A25 with 10,000 square foot minimum lots. Right?
The only thing
Well,
that,
so you divide it up, well, we're gonna have to lose 1 or 2 lots to put in the streets and everything, that's what it comes down to.
So what they
If you-
want
if
is
you-
they
if you
want
maintain the
some
minimum
lots.
lot size, then you will have those, and they have to reduce the number
Well,
of
am I-
lots.
Am I wrong though? I saw there 11 lots and they were all like 20,000 acre
Yeah.
lots, right? on the
they're
plat.
larger.
Yeah,
but,
I mean,
but again, it goes back to
15
the,
to 20,000,
back to the point of,
13,000.
then let's not call it agricultural. If
and
we're
that's
not gonna
another
require
conversation.
at least something in there to be more of an agricultural lots, it's like if, okay, then at least 2 of them have to be half an acre, or something like that, you know what I mean? And, but that was the idea behind, because I was part of that when they went to A25, the 1.8, there's only supposed to have 1.8
Right.
units per acre, and it's intended to be that way so that some of the lots have to be larger.
Many of us, I'm saying staff and me, I'm the only surviving member of that council, we tried to fix this, you guys remember, we tried. And that council voted against it, that's why we still
Right.
have it the way it is. we've gone
Down
through,
that
and
path.
I'm fine going down that path again if we actually get it done. But we got to the end and there were a couple of people that had interests that they didn't wanna go against themselves.
This will fix another chunk of sidewalk.
But as far as the 825, to move this along, we need to fix a bigger problem. I'm fine, I mean, the zone fits the general plan and if the planning commission says we're okay with that, but we recommend, minimum lot size or maximum number of lots, whatever.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt, but
Strongly suggest the planning commission recommend.
yeah.
Keep looking one direction, cause there's only one planning commission.
Alright, do you need any further direction on that item?
Thank
Great, we
you.
will move to our last, nope, not our last item. We will move to item 3.8, discussion of a proposed general plan and zoning amendment request from Jeanette King for 1.7 acres located at 6387 West, 13100 South from low density residential to commercial and 8.25 to C2 commercial.
Thank you. This is again, another privately initiated general plan and zoning map amendment. Both projects have been moving parallel with each other. There is no pending site plan, conditional use, subdivision. There's been no further application submitted for these properties.
Except for the one that we saw in the presentation.
That was just a site plan for a concept, just to show what they're thinking for the property, but that has not been submitted for any type of review
So
before the
it's
planning commission.
what possibly they might be thinking
Yeah,
about.
right. So general location of this site, more specifically, you can see currently it is zoned 8.25. It is, there's two parcels here.
More specifically, right next to our new stoplight,
Yes,
sorry.
yes, and that is, everyone understands that this intersection and these roads we're anticipating increased traffic volume over time, right, with all the growth to the north. Yeah. So again, we've talked about what the applicant's proposal is. They're hoping to do some kind of gas station, car wash, maybe a small office building. There will be a phased development approach.
It's that ambiguity that gave me pause, right?
Yeah.
Like, it does not sound like they have a plan for this.
Now, the
could
gas
not agree
station
with-
convenience store is definitely, that's one thing they really want. The
Instead of
office, I think.
kiosk.
Yeah, I mean, they're showing convenience store, but
That's the, I'm just to say, this is one of the issues I have about doing zoning in advance of a formal adopted plan or agreement, right? Because this is the same kind of thing is, they want us to agree to make a zoning change.
And then
We're
they'll
thinking
figure
it's
out
gonna
what
be
to do.
commercial, and then they put a charter school there.
Can I,
Right, I
sorry.
mean, that's the stuff that drives me nuts, and we don't have any mechanism in our agreements anywhere that says, we'll zone this with this plan. If you don't do that plan, we don't get to take back the zoning, that's what,
We could
this
zone
whole
it with
thing
that
is so
condition,
frustrating.
right?
Yeah,
We can
zoning
put a
condition.
zoning
We gotta
condition.
do that.
right,
Yeah.
right.
But the problem is, they don't have a complete plan.
Right.
But we did get zoning conditions, as you saw in the staff report recommended from the commission. So the idea is that the resident of the home would likely remain on site, and there would be an effort to begin commercial development of the balance of the property. So a couple of slides of the site
We
in
want commercial, don't
question.
get me wrong, but
Yeah. So there was a neighborhood meeting, we did have concerns about just general conflicts between commercial and residential. Some residents expressing that they preferred, the lower density agricultural type
Who said
uses.
they wanted apartments? That
Yeah,
kind
there
of,
was a comment about that.
that was a very interesting comment.
Yeah.
It's the first time I think I've ever heard somebody say they would rather have apartments in the community.
No, something residential versus
because they really
commercial,
don't
I
want a
think.
gas station.
Yeah, I think that's true.
They just don't want a gas station.
So in the general plan, the current general plan, we were anticipating commercial on the corner, but not extending as far south as what's being proposed. In the draft general plan, something lighter, it's being called neighborhood commercial we really don't have a zoning type that fits that general plan designation. We would probably need to create a neighborhood commercial zone, which I think would be appropriate for the city if we indeed adopt a neighborhood commercial land use designation in our general plan. So again, there are some reasons for seeing a change of use from residential to commercial on this property. We've been anticipating that that would happen with increased traffic. There is concerns about compatibility. Obviously, the commercial zone does have certain standards to try and address those issues. We do require the masonry wall between residential and commercial. There are setbacks. We could require, additional tree plantings and things to mitigate some of those concerns through the conditional use process. There was concern through the public hearing process specifically about the car wash, potential car wash, and you saw that that was a zoning condition that would not be an allowed use.
Where would they put the car wash?
At
don't
the
know.
gas station.
Yeah, we're not sure. We had talked about possibly doing a C1 zone recommendation in lieu of the C2. But the C1 did not allow for a convenience store and a gas station combined. So the recommendation from the planning commission was to change the general plan. That was a 6-0 vote. On the zoning map, it was recommended 5-1. The one was Forrest Sickles, who was sitting as a voting member. He's an alternate. And he just didn't feel like the C2 zone was the right zoning type for that corner. So the planning commission made this recommendation and they limited those uses to what's specified on the screen. Permitted uses, would be specified, and then the one prohibited use would be the car wash.
Can you go back to the maps?
Financial institution.
You wanna see the site plan or this?
That's fine right there.
Okay.
Plenty.
One of the things I really don't like is building a gas station around a current resident. So go to the other one that shows where the residents currently
The
live.
existing home.
The existing
That's-
home.
They're further down there.
That makes me really nervous. That right there.
Yeah.
But the gas
Especially
station
being
would
that
be-
that literally goes to their back like the physical back of their house. Like there's no setback there, is there?
Well, the property line, I think that is a reflection of the existing,
Well, they're
it's
part
a little
of
hard to
the,
see.
they're part of the property owners, right?
Yeah,
So-
and they're the
And
ones
their intent is
requesting
that
it.
when,
Yeah.
at least reading the report, is that when she does not, when whoever's living there isn't gonna live there anymore, they'll
Right.
use the house as an office, right? So for, whatever an office
Right.
use would be,
Converted
a
to a
house right there. So they're not gonna, it doesn't sound like they plan on tearing that house down.
At least not right now, that's not their plan, but
Yeah.
things change,
Right.
yeah.
This is a tough one.
I don't feel good about this. And I don't have a way to articulate it right this particular moment. And partly that's because I probably don't have enough information.
Yeah.
But from this particular look at it, this does not scream, this does not say to me this is a benefit to our community. I am willing absolutely to consider rezoning this area as commercial. I think it says that on our general plan. I don't have any issues with that. Regardless, and if they want to continue with a rezone request, I would probably be okay approving commercial. However, I would feel the need to express such conditions as that there would be no residential at the same time. Like I would not want that resident still living there while that gas station was there.
Well, and that back half
Oh, sorry.
is not compliant, would not be compliant with the general plan as it is.
Exactly.
Right, it's only the
Right.
first half of that is in the general plan
Right,
as commercial.
the northern,
So
Third.
for me, I am, if somebody wants to rezone something commercial, as a rule, I'm generally not gonna have a problem with it.
so remember, the council has a lot of latitude when it comes to designating the general plan. If the council is not comfortable, if we feel like it's not ripe yet for a change in land use, Or, for example, if we feel like a lower intensity commercial zone may be appropriate in the future, assuming the draft general plan, the proposed general plan is adopted. And I've mentioned, we would need to create a new zoning tool that would be appropriate for a corner location like
I
this.
think that might be more, in all honesty, more appropriate than a C2 zone, is more of a neighborhood type zone. I don't know, I see this, I look at this, now that I've been doing this for a few years, I look at it and go, something's not right, and I think it's gonna come back to bite us.
One thing that is, it can be a little difficult having a gas station convenience store next to residential. We see it.
I've lived next to one.
Yep, sometimes
yeah.
people don't like it.
And I live extremely close to this, like I
We
get
have the
it.
boulders over there right on Rosecrest. That's
Yeah,
right up against.
Literally next to it.
sometimes it works, sometimes people don't like it. So it will be a concern.
Usually if the
It
gas
will be a
station's
concern.
there first and then they build those rooms, then there's
That's a
no
whole
problem
Right,
whatsoever.
right.
I
Vice
think
versa.
though it's not very odd to anticipate that we master planned that corner to be commercial, which in my mind, you're thinking that's gonna be a gas station, cause that's gonna be Main Street, that's gonna be a thoroughfare, that's
It's a
gonna
great
be,
C-store place, right?
that's gonna be a gas station, so
When all
in
this
my
is
mind,
built
that-
out in 10 years,
Yeah, in my mind, yeah, that totally makes sense, and to extend it a little farther and do some sort of residential, commercial type of thing, to me, that totally makes sense, I'm not opposed to changing that land use at all, especially because the residents to the east of that, we're gonna do some things in there that's gonna buffer the impact of that, the precast walls, trees, those types of things. And we can even make sure that their uses are harmonious with residential areas, those types of things. I'm not super opposed to that because again, we're talking about people traveling. Well, I don't go to that holiday, but you have to go down into town to get gas, right? And so if there's something there more convenient, it just breaks that up and you don't have to travel all the way down and back and forth. Or, heck, when you need to go to the dentist, we need another dent or credit union.
Everybody that lives or is gonna live over here wants a gas station.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly,
But nobody that lives right here is gonna want a gas
right?
station. Does,
Those
that's
people
just-
go out and go down to
But-
Hard Circle Corner, yeah.
But it's already planned for that in our, when they
That's a good
moved
point,
there,
if it
they
weren't in, if
saw
that
that.
weren't in the general plan already, right, then,
Yeah,
and you wanted,
We
and you're
changed-
asking for both,
We need to put that in the
pretty
general
tough.
but it's already in there.
What I don't like is
Uh,
leaving
so
the old
when did
house
we-
and trying
when
to
did we
build things
purge-
around it and
change that
somebody's
to
gonna
commercial
live
in
there
general?
and maybe
was it
they'll
20?
make it commercial later, are we doing the whole thing or not?
Oh, I think we
After
have to
the
do the
houses
whole
went in?
thing
Then the
as
current
commercial.
plan.
They determined
It's
that,
all
they
done
might
before.
still live in there, we can't force you not to, but I
Oh,
don't
that's
think,
true. Yeah, I'd have to
I don't
look.
think we have one little island in there, that's
So,
not
so is
part
the
of it.
issue before council tonight, what is specifically are you asking council for direction tonight?
So this is a briefing just to let them know about what's coming to them next for action. General plan, rezone. Yes, does the council
What is
want
your-
us to
what is
make
your
any further?
recommendation?
Yeah, it was commercial.
What do you think we should do?
Like my inclination is that I don't think the C2 zone is right either. Commission, I think, felt like that was far too broad, that's why they really narrowed it down with those zoning conditions. Perhaps there's some additional zoning conditions we could propose, but we are fairly limited to what types of things we can add as a zoning condition.
Just
We
because
can
they-
do
that-
setbacks is one of those
Just because
things.
that's what they applied for, doesn't mean that's what we
True.
have to, right, we can,
True. We can
they
do a
made the
C1.
application, we can zone it at whatever we want at
Yeah.
that point, right? So I don't say that to say, well, we can do whatever we want, but if there's another zone that fits better for whatever reason, give us that suggestion.
The C1 is lower intensity, but it doesn't allow for the gas station.
FR 2.5.
And we can't, we
Can't
could,
do that. Just to clarify, the bullet points on the left-hand side of the screen, we're not saying that this proposal meets those. We're saying that in our current ordinance, those are the types of things that we're looking to satisfy or say that this change achieves those bullet points.
I struggle with the
From-
current zoning request as it is. I would be more willing to look at it if it was something that was a little bit more specific to a local neighborhood, but just putting in a C2, that does cause me some concern and some pause without further having, for example, a request of exactly where you'd be going.
The C2, under the current planning commission regulation or proposal is very narrow, right? I mean, it really limited. to what, 6 or 7 uses?
Hey Mike, quick
Yeah.
comment, the
Yes.
parcel to the north, that's been commercial for a long, long time.
It was made commercial in 2010 with a
And they haven't done anything with that. So, I mean, they tried to turn it back to residential, because they didn't think it was a good spot for a gas station. So just
Yeah.
keep that in mind, we already have a corner that's been that
It's
way
true.
for quite a few
Yeah,
years.
but we didn't have Olympia Hills then either.
Yeah,
It's not done anything.
yeah.
Well, that's the thing, and that's Dan's property right there, right? It's already being built. There's gonna be a whole ton more traffic there where, geez, every corner could be, right? I mean, it's all about traffic count for those sorts of
Yep.
things. Which is why I think it's smart for them to put that in the general plan. So I think, just talking out loud, right, cause the applicant wants feedback, right? This is gonna go to the council, which way are they leaning, what do we, are there changes we can make, that kind of stuff. That's the thing that bothers me the most is the existing house and somebody's gonna continue living
Yeah.
there and.
Can,
But as you can see, the homeowner's the one who's the petitioner.
Right, and
Yeah,
but
the resident, yeah.
the second thing that does bother me is that we have, homeowners who live next door, like, that's what I said for years and years, is that the
Yeah.
property rights don't just apply to the person that wants to change what they're doing with
Yeah.
the property.
Yeah.
The people living next door have those rights, and what you do next door affects them. That's why we have this process, right?
Personally, I would wait for a neighborhood commercial zone. That tool for that corner. But maybe you could layer on a number of zoning conditions that everybody could feel comfortable with it.
Well,
But that would be
and
what I would do.
and I'm okay if there's like if there's an application for a business or a design or something going in, I could be persuaded that we would condition the heck out of a C2 and move forward with their application,
Well,
right?
so,
But to do this in a general thing, okay, we're gonna rezone it with a whole bunch of conditions and have no idea which one of these 6 or 7 things are going in there. And there's a house and there's neighbors and everything else, I'm not down with that right now.
I think a great example of the difference is that the Maverick and the, little strip mall thing on Harriman, on the corner of Harriman, Main Street and 126, right? Because that was the case. It was somewhat similar, the existing neighbors did not want it there for a ton of different reasons, but they came in with a specific plan, a specific user, this is what we're gonna
A
do.
way to
And we
address
layered,
those
and
issues,
we layered
yeah.
on all the conditions we could possibly think of, right? To keep it to that use, and that's what's there. I'd be way more comfortable with something like that we knew what the end product was
Agree.
really gonna be, right?
Yeah.
Than
Well-
just trying to think of every scenario in a zoning condition.
Yeah, I'd much rather it
Yeah.
be accompanied by a plan.
Okay,
Alright, any further direction?
I'm not going to make any changes to the proposal then, and we're just gonna bring this for a future action.
Fantastic, we will move on to item 4.1, working group updates. What do we got?
So my name's not next to this, but generally I have kind of taken the lead on this.
Which we appreciate.
I'll kind of kick it off again. I it was very helpful for staff at the last meeting when we had a robust conversation about what the working groups had talked about and received some direction. We were able to take that back and to those working groups and craft those discussions in such a way that they reflected that direction that we received from council. So since our last meeting, we have had a finance presentation, I would call it. We had a representative from DA Davidson come and talk about what a pit might look like in Olympia Hills. It was a very 20,000 foot view, I think. Those council members that were present at that can fill us in on what their thoughts were on that. We've had an infrastructure meeting. The goal with those meetings at this point is to try to identify what public and capital infrastructure is going to be within the project.
Did I miss that one? Cause they've been canceled, right?
So that we called the
Sherpa
Sherpa
meeting,
meeting.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Sherpa,
Yeah,
that's,
and so it was the technical committee to report back to the
Okay,
larger.
Okay, cause I'm like,
infrastructure
did I miss them? Cause I thought they'd all been
I
canceled.
forgot about the Sherpa.
I was feeling good about that.
So we can get an update from the staff members who've been part of that and how that plays into the bigger infrastructure discussion. Which also ties into the finance portion, which is really kind of one of the last outstanding items. I've met with the MDA group. I've sent out a copy of the draft MDA to all the council members. I've got some feedback from a few of you that I need to touch base on. And then the design guidelines will be on for public hearing tomorrow with the planning commission. And then I will also be presenting a draft of the MDA to the planning commission to kind of kick off their involvement in that process.
Well, I bet you they're looking forward to that.
Which draft, so when we talked at our last MBA meeting, we talked about they're still at like 70% multifamily, 30% single family, that's the draft that's going to planning commission?
That is the draft that's gone to them with a note on my end that that's something that still needs to be negotiated with the
And have we
developer.
talked with the developer on that, as far as that negotiation, where is that?
We're working on that piece
And
still
that
and getting
draft
that changed.
MDA is just in the work session.
Yeah.
And the draft design standards are for hearing, but we're recommending that they table that item or continue it, whatever is appropriate. And then have the MDA catch up to the design standards. So we.
Rather than inundating them with 180 pages or 200 pages of design guidelines and MDA, we thought, let's parcel them out a little bit.
Come
and give
on,
them some-
300 in
give
one
them some
meeting,
time,
whatever.
so.
Do that all the time.
Just gives them, early opportunity to review it, take comment on it.
So that's, again, that's my update. I love the council members who were present at some of those other meetings to chime in with updates and direction for staff.
I know usually I don't say a whole lot, and I've said a lot tonight.
You have a Red Bull
One-
before you came?
So one comment I have on this one, to me, the MDA is it. Right? I've said, I'll talk till I'm blue in the face. We have control over nothing once that is signed and done. What would be extremely helpful, is if we could get some of the high points. So the MDA that the county approved is kind of what we're working off of, right? Almost a template, this is what they have there and that's what they
This is
want.
kind of where they're starting
I,
point was.
I took the portions of that I thought would be agreeable to the council and kept those and scratched everything else.
So what are those key elements, right? So to me, it'd be some of the things that we mentioned. Timing of phases, right? So one thing that we talked about during the county's deliberation was, look, if they're promising this much commercial or employment areas, right? But they wanna do all of the residential first, and we never get the stuff that the city wants, right? Or that really benefits the public, right? We're gonna end up with what we always ended up with, which is they'll get to the end and go, well, it's not viable, we just need to do more residential.
That's exactly what it was.
So what is the phasing? What were they required under the county and what are we proposing under this one, right? If you can give us kind of a,
Right, just because I wanna tag in right where you're saying that, is that their transportation study, as far as I understand it bases traffic counts based on people staying in the community.
yes, and that's part of my point, right, with the
We found way
phasing.
sooner that if we allow them to build out all this residential, unless they're tied to the other.
Well, their traffic study depends on two main factors. One is a large number of the populace living, working and playing there, they never leave the city or that area, right? Second is that a certain percentage, and quite a large percentage, will use public transportation, which there are no plans.
And we saw that tonight.
Right, to bring it out there. So that there's kind of those two big things, which is why the phasing to me matters even more. So, what were they required under this? What are we proposing at least initially here? Give us some talking points to go to rather than a 4,000 page, Word document that I'm gonna try to read before I go to bed every night.
So would it be helpful if I put together a table of, well, I'll present it as two options. First option is, here's what the county approved, here's where we're at currently, and then here's the last column of where we want to get, or just, here's where we're at currently.
I'd
And
like
with
a
that-
summary of here's the key elements of what the county had approved.
Yeah.
Right, so that, to me, that's kind of a baseline of
That's where we're starting.
some of the key things to look at, and then we can work with, well, where do we want those things to fall, right? I'm just pulling the phasing thing out, it's just one major issue in the MDA, that we have to nail this stuff down at this stage, and if we get it wrong, our city's screwed for 50 years as this
And I
builds.
completely agree with you, Jared, on that
So,
point.
like the phasing thing to me, just as an example, and I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not saying this is what I want it to say or anything, but if they build so many number of residential units, right, they reach that threshold, then they've got to bring in so many jobs, right, or build whatever square feet of
Infrastructure,
whatever
yeah.
space sort of deal. There's, some requirement to then continue with there was some of that in the county one, not nearly what, we all thought it should be, but just as an example, some of those kind of key things, cause I'm trying to read through that right now, and I know lawyers like legalese, but it puts me to sleep, right? And it's, I'm
No,
going
there's
on
a-
like 3 weeks and like, I've made it through 3 pages.
There's another aspect of that I think that's really important is that so often the area that's commercial and residential all gets sold off in one big piece to a residential developer.
Yep.
And they don't have any interest or skills or ability in delivering, developing the commercial portion of the parcel they built. And so they wanna sell it off to somebody else and
They can't.
after it goes through that process a couple times, what was the developer originally planned versus what the home builder finally does versus what the actual commercial property owner at the end does can be a way different thing.
Sure.
And I think we're looking for ways to say, if this is what the plan is, even in a general sense, if it's a bubble plan, okay, we're gonna have this, we're gonna have, this is gonna be the property mix, here's the densities, here's
Can't build
the square
nothing
footage
but
of, retail and commercial and office and whatever. Some of those have to be, to your point, tied together and tied together well, if that makes sense. So, to your point, if they're gonna build 1,500 homes, then there should be X number of space of at least community, commercial, and an office building that can employ, 150 people or something, right?
Generally, you would see that as like a phasing plan where you say,
Right.
we will not issue any building permits past 1,500 unless you have 1,000 or 2,000 or however many square feet
Right.
of commercial. Right.
Or X percent of your total plan of commercial or something, right?
So whatever those key elements are, like, I guess what I'm asking for is almost like a T-chart, right? Show me, this is kind of where it was and this is what where we're at here, and then the open space for me to write in what I want it to be.
So the
Right?
draft does not have that level of detail. Do you have an idea of what you would like to see there right now?
Can I beat my dead horse again?
Yeah.
This is precisely why I keep saying, this MDA can't be a committee, this MDA needs to be a work group with all the council sitting on, cause everything you just said, I said to Chase in our first meeting, and so it's like, so we're echoing the same thing for 3 meetings, it's like if we just all had a special work meeting that we're hammering out some stuff on the MDA where we're all here, it just seems like so much better use of our time.
I would love that. Yeah, I
And
think
it's
a special
control.
meeting would be good.
It's
Cause
just
I'm
the
laying on
control.
I read like almost every word of the packets in preparation for the meeting, but
Oh,
you hand me the legalese sort of like, that is falling to the back, and I have not read it all to give you real feedback. So I guess that's, for me, that's why I'm asking for, give me a
Yeah.
bullet point summary of the high points, like what are the main issues? So I don't have to dig through it and try to find it,
You know,
and that might help save some time too.
if I could just, I'll say this kind of as a general, right? I think that our city's general plan for that area was at like 3 units an acre. The county's general plan for that area was 5 units an acre.
It was 3, they would allow a maximum
They would
of
allow
5
up to
if
5,
there were
right.
a bunch of other
Some other
changes
stuff,
to
right.
supporting infrastructure.
And, and we're approaching 7. I think Jared's said it pretty succinctly. We're fairly agnostic to the density number, whatever that is, high, low, in between, it doesn't really matter. It's what's being done to
Support it.
support that number, what's being done to incentivize a development that's so much beyond what was planned, right? What amenities are gonna be involved, what special, unicorns are there that make it
No play.
meaningful to approve that much development, right? I mean, the argument was always made, you're gonna be pitting essentially 25,000 people on, when you take out the university, 850 acres?
Not to mention all the roads and.
800 acres?
And let's
And
be,
that's denser than Boston.
and
right?
let's
So-
be real honest about the university part, the USU part. That's not public space, that does not help offset the issues of density, and when I mean that we're agnostic when it comes to the density number, as long as there's the supporting infrastructure, right? To me, the best way that I can kind of, I guess, put a metaphor to it is, to me, density is like a pressure cooker, right? And the more density you pack in there, and I know Chief and I have talked about this before, right? You'll see higher crime rates in some places because you're cramming so many more people into a tighter space, they're bumping into each other more, right? There's that pressure there, and without a relief valve every so often to release that pressure, you're asking for trouble, right? And so for me, the thing we all hear all the time, and I live out in that area, it's traffic. It's that compounding effect, right? There has to be real roads. The traffic study is skewed already with two erroneous assumptions that they base a lot of things on. But to me, it's transportation, water, and true open space to relieve that pressure. Are there places for people to do things? Not just a trail, not just a little pocket park nobody, uses, but are there real amenities for people to use and relieve that pressure? Or are we shoving everybody into a cul-de-sac and saying, all right, 50 kids, you guys figure out how much space each of you need to play a game and get along? It's never gonna happen, right? So the MDA is the only place that we have to work that out, and trying to do it on a artificially condensed timeline is gonna be difficult, but it's doable if we identify a lot of those things and work from.
Yeah, cause I would say this, most of the things we've spent our time on at this point, engineering discussions and road cross sections and potential financing mechanisms, and most of that, I think we're generally in agreement. That's why the conversations have been generally easy, right? Yeah, we know a road has to be X. Okay, we'll do this. We're gonna build this road. You're gonna build that road.
We're seeing that we can partner with other places and get money for some of these.
All that stuff's good, but we haven't really gotten to the hard stuff yet, right?
it's
And I think that
it's time.
I think we're kind of saying,
The
okay,
NDA
if this
is
is,
where it's
if
gonna
this,
happen.
if we're accepting the annexation petition and now we're gonna have public meetings and stuff, you can't have public meetings with stuff to be determined.
Yeah, it's time to figure it
We've
out.
gotta get those numbers, we've gotta get those elements, we've gotta get those details.
So
out on the
prime
table
example
and
of that
work
is
through
we've had a total of 2 real finance committee meetings. And really all that we've talked about is PID, because they don't wanna do a special assessment area, they don't wanna pledge the property to it. They don't wanna do impact fees,
Traditional
cause it'll
impact
take
fees, right.
too long, they want the money up front. What was the other one, contract fee, same sort of thing, but that gives us more
Some
too. So,
flexibility.
I know I told Sherry a little bit about that meeting, so for everybody else, really what we talked about with the PID with D.A. Davidson's financial firm, they do underwriting for this kind of stuff. There was one thing I learned in that meeting, which was, that I didn't know in our previous meetings about PIDs, is that you don't have to use property tax. You can use impact fees or the contract fee as the source of revenue, and still, cause the idea of, there's several ideas of PID, but for me, in this case, what we've talked about, which I think is a legitimate idea, is that it makes sense, just like doing the road bond, to get money up front and build the roads and the key infrastructure things that are gonna be affected, rather than doing it piecemeal as you get building, approvals and we're reimbursing, and they don't wanna put money up front for it and wait to be reimbursed. Totally get that, nothing wrong with that.
Want to be on the hook for a reimbursement agreement 7 years down the road when we don't know how much it's gonna cost.
Exactly, so the idea of, if they're willing to do it, and D.A. Davidson said, that we do it all the time. Property tax is probably, happens more often, but no, with using those other two to do the PID, we do that all the time, there's not a problem with that. I'm definitely open to that idea, because you're not increasing the cost of living for the resident down the road with a property tax, right? We talked about property taxes, I'm gonna sidebar, squirrel just a little bit on, it would only be this much, per average house price. We've lived here since 2009, my property tax have more than doubled during that time. And being in this position, sitting on those boards and going through every single one of those line items on your property tax, every single one of those entities has said the exact same thing. It's only $30 more per household on an average household. Well, that average $230 household, it doesn't exist now, it's double that easy as an average. And when you add that up amongst all of those entities, and they all seem to do that every 5 to 7 years, there's how it doubles, right? And so adding another $100, per average house per year doesn't sound like a lot in and of itself, but when you're adding it to the long list of things, that dramatically increases cost of living. So I'm adamantly opposed to doing a property tax that increases cost of living, but if it's just a way of getting the money up front, and we're still using impact fees or contract fee, whatever's worked out, to be the funding mechanism for it, I have no issue with that. Does that kind of summarize
You said it
that?
exactly, and I'm totally in agreement
Plus
with
it
you.
ties the contract fee in my mind to the fee, and so it doesn't
Right.
untie
And then we're not
council's hand
involved.
to use it someplace else.
Right.
Because whether it's us or the next council, it could be, they can use that wherever they want, but it needs to be tied.
Then it's
to the fee.
between basically the developer, home builders, and the financing company, not the city.
And what's interesting
Which is different than the
too
auto mall because we own,
is that
still open to talk about this.
a portion of the contract fee can be pledged as repayment for the PID bond. The rest of the contract fee can be used for other things, right? So you can get upfront money and ongoing money, right, for infrastructure as it goes in,
And
so.
the PID will pay for project plus improvements,
Right.
not just project improvements.
Yeah, same with the contract fee can be, it's project plus,
Inflation and.
right? I mean, you can, and that can be adjusted and, modified,
The other
right?
thing we talked about in relation to that was the fact that we would exclude police and fire, right? Those are still gonna be those regular impact fees to go towards building those facilities on those plans, like those would be separate, so it would be basically the actual infrastructure of water, roads, et cetera, as part of that
Sewer,
agreement.
stormwater,
Right. So it's not that all one or the other, we can piecemeal it out sort of thing. So there's, like I said, I think we can come to agreement on kind of some general concepts of how to do things. Okay, rubber has to meet the road now, what are the details? We need to have that comparison and say, okay, here's what we've got in the hammer. And then the only place for that really to happen is the MDA. So I think maybe Sherry's suggestion kind of is right. At this point, okay, we all have to sit down and go through those points and start identifying what are our non-negotiables, what are the things that we wanna see happen
Yeah.
back and forth.
And I would suggest that is a council meeting, I'm not suggesting somebody would suggest otherwise, this isn't bring in the developer, bring in everybody, this
This is for us to
is
decide.
for us to
Because
decide what our hard lines
Cause
are.
if we're doing everything in that format, we're negotiating against ourselves at some
Yes.
point, right?
Right.
Clint, any thoughts?
No, I think
Yeah, still a big.
being able to have a meeting all together, to talk through those, the main key components that everyone wants to see in there. At some point, obviously, we've gotta be able to do that in order to save ourselves, really to be more efficient and to move the MDA forward.
You got the rest you need? Okay, any further discussion on this item? Awesome, with that, I will accept a motion to move into closed session.
Motion to temporarily recess city council meeting to convene in closed session for the purpose to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property as provided by Utah Code annotated section 52-4-205 after 2-minute break.
I don't believe I've ever made that motion.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
Meeting's over, it should be over.
Do I have a second? Alright, Clint,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Jared,
Yeah.
I vote yes, that motion
Yes.
passes. We'll take a quick
Abstains.
2-minute break. Thanks, guys, appreciate everybody staying.
Lauren.
See you guys.
Quick break.
Great talk, everybody.
I got